Well, hello and welcome to Solar Alberta's 2022 Solar Show. This evening, we're delighted to share with you Nerding Out for Net Zero, at which we'll hear from Vanessa White of Alberta Innovates, Gregory Robart of Smart Grid Innovation Network, Jennifer Hiscock of Natural Resources Canada, and of course, our moderator this evening will be Lindsay Mitchell of Energy AI, who will be introduced in a little bit. Please note that we have enabled closed captioning for this presentation. You can turn the captioning on in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. My name is Heather McKenzie, and I'm the Executive Director of Solar Alberta. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that while Solar Alberta serves members and the general public from Treaties 6, 7, and 8, I am presenting you today from Amiskwaciy-Waskahagan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is located on Treaty 6 territory and the homelands of the Métis Nation. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place and home of many Indigenous peoples, including Papaches, Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux, nations whose ancestors have cared for and nurtured these lands since time immemorial. Please note that we will be recording this session and making it available on our website and YouTube channel following the show. We were delighted to have so many people register for this week and for this event in particular. To start, we'd like to thank the City of Edmonton Change for Climate for sponsoring the 2022 Solar Show. And we'd also like to thank AltaPro for sponsoring this session in particular. We're really happy and grateful to have them both as sponsors. Following the presentation this evening, there will be a Q&A period in which you can all participate. So we're going to start with a moderated Q&A by Lindsay, and then we're going to shift into a participant Q&A. The formal Q&A that you can all participate in will run for till about 1:15, and then we'll be inviting you to join us for a bonus section, 15 minutes in a more relaxed Zoom meeting Q&A at the end. The link for the extended Q&A is going to be posted in the chat at the end of the formal time together, and I will draw your attention to it at that time. So you don't need to worry too much about it. Just make sure to click on the link for that meeting room before leaving the webinar and get to know our presenters better. The entire session will wrap up in an hour and a half. As this is an online conference and trade show, I would like to encourage you all to check out our online trade show during the week. We have listed here all the wonderful organizations who are participating in the trade show. To view their exhibitor booths, which include a listing of key solar-related services, contact info, and video introductions, please click on the link in the chat. During our formal Q&A period, we will be using Zoom Q&A for questions rather than the chat box. So please enter your questions in the Q&A section. Also, please click on the little thumbs up symbol to upvote questions you like. Before we move forward, we're going to do a quick poll to get a sense of who we have joining us today. Please take a minute to answer the three questions that are going to be quickly popping up on your screen now. Just wait as you folks get a chance to answer these questions here. And I'm not seeing too many answers coming in. Oh, there they come. Sometimes it can take a minute before it's registering for everyone. Okay. We thought hosting this event in the evening might bring an interesting and different crowd, and I think that is exactly what's happening. Yeah, we're getting up there. Thanks for everyone participating. Great. All right, that's pretty good participation rate. I think we can end the poll there and share the results. So we have a lot of solar curious folks tonight. So that's wonderful. That's exactly what we were anticipating. We're really happy to have you here, and we're hoping our presenters will spell out all their acronyms tonight. That's one of the things we've been trying to do at all of our public sessions. A lot of you, it's your first time here, or you've only attended a few in the past. Welcome. And of course, our regular members, always welcome to have you here too. And it looks like a good number of you will be attending sessions later this week. I hope you enjoy the rest of our program as well. So I'm going to stop sharing those results now, and also encourage you to take a quick minute to pop your name, land acknowledgement, and any contact info you're comfortable sharing in the chat now and throughout the event. That way others can look you up on LinkedIn or email you, and hopefully some relationships can begin to be formed at this conference. And now just a little intro of Solar Alberta. Did you know this is actually our 31st year of operation? Solar Alberta is a not-for-profit society that is dedicated to accelerating Alberta's transition to a just and sustainable energy future. We do so by advocating, educating, and serving as an industry and community hub. Our membership is made up of over 350 individuals and businesses. We provide a number of services, including managing a solar directory for our website. In this way, we act as a bridge for installers and suppliers to connect with their customers and clients. You can see a screenshot of the directory here on this slide. In addition to our website services, we run a number of educational programs, such as the Solar Seminar Series, new multilingual Solar 101 workshops, including one in Hindi that is planned for February 23rd, and of course, this incredible annual solar show. We're very proud to share that in 2021, our solar show reached people from over 60 different municipalities and counties around Alberta. And you can see little dots where everybody tuned in from on this map here. With over 2,600 session attendees registered for our show this year, we anticipate excellent reach across our province and around the world once again. In addition to our live online programming this week, we also have great content available on our website from our 2021 show that is still relevant today, including one on solar PV recycling, which we get lots of questions about, so check it out. We have spaced our sessions out in such a way this year that you could easily view one of those other sessions in between live webinars this week. I say easily, knowing that many of us are home with kids right now, so nothing's easy in that context. But anyways, I digress. And for those of you who are solar industry professionals or transitioning into the sector, you will be pleased to learn that we have also now made available all of the paid content from last year's solar show via our new pay-per-download training service. You can go to the training video link in the chat to find those affordable workshops. In addition to some solar show workshops that are industry oriented, this spring we will once again be running a number of online courses for solar industry professionals and those transitioning into the sector. Our 7 courses are online Tuesday and Thursday evenings on 3 to 5 nights over 2 to 3 weeks. You can already register for all of our courses at the link provided in the chat. Those include the brand new course about working with Alberta's wire providers, which will expand upon the related workshop being offered tomorrow at 3 p.m. Also, if the course you're interested in isn't offered at the time that works for you, you can now pay to download most of our past course content as well. These recorded sessions are available alongside our paid past solar show workshops in the new solar training videos section of our website. Just want to take a quick moment to encourage you all to join Solar Alberta as a member. For this week only, we are offering a discount on our individual and student memberships to celebrate having turned 30 in 2021. From February 7th to 11th, you can purchase an individual or student membership with a 30% discount. The link to become a member is also being placed in the chat. On March 16th, we'll be hosting our annual general meeting. I just want to take a minute to invite you all to sign up as Solar Alberta members, attend and elect your new board. There are a number of vacancies to fill on the board this year. So if you're interested in applying to serve on the board, you can do so through our website until February 18th. If you can't quite commit to board work, but you're looking to support us in a big way, you can consider volunteering or donating. Volunteers are eligible for free membership and $100 off a course each year after committing 15 hours to Solar Alberta. The links to sign up as volunteers or donate are also going into the chat. And last but not least, I want to take this opportunity to mention that this past year, Solar Alberta won an Emerald Award. As part of our Emerald Award, the Emerald Foundation kindly made a short documentary about Solar Alberta. After the session, you can feel free to check it out in the link that we're now sharing in the chat. We're really proud and thankful to have been recognized in this manner for the second time in our history. Now I'm delighted to get this session underway by introducing our sponsor, David De Bruin of UltraPro, who will be briefly introducing UltraPro, and then our moderator, Lindsay Mitchell, for today. All right, David, please join me on camera now, and I'll stop my screen share so that you can do your introductions.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Heather. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is David De Bruin. I lead the Renewable Resources Department at UltraPro, as well as CFO for the whole company. I'm going to give a brief intro, as Heather said, about Ultra, and then get on to a moderator for tonight's session. So Ultra is an Alberta-based business with over 300 employees, and we do a wide variety of electrical services throughout Alberta. We work primarily on commercial and utility scale projects. So we build new projects like new schools, downtown high rises, large multi-tenant warehouses, as well as some light industrial work. So some of the mod yards you see with the skids go up north, we do those. We have a large service fleet as well, maintaining many building electrical systems. So whether it be fire alarm upgrades or camera systems, and we do a lot of LED lighting replacements around the city. So we have a 24/7 fleet, and we operate mainly with our service department in the Edmonton and surrounding area, but primarily most of all Alberta for the rest of our services. And why we're here tonight. So we have a large renewable resource department. We perform a broad spectrum of services in solar. So we do residential solar systems. These are mostly, grid tied systems with no batteries. We do commercial solar systems. So what we consider over 50 kilowatts DC up to some of our larger 2.8 megawatt systems. Currently, Ultra holds the title for Canada's largest commercial rooftop solar system installation, and we're currently working on raising that bar. So more on that in some coming weeks, but we also do utility solar. So those are projects typically of 50 acres or larger, chunks of land we develop, and off-grid solar systems. So whether we're taking a diesel generator off-grid on a remote mountain, taking it offline with solar and batteries, or a simple subdivision sign when you roll into the subdivisions, like with the sign coming into Jasper, lit up LED, you may notice that one. We have a off-grid kit for there as well. So now to introduce tonight's moderator, Lindsay. Lindsay Mitchell is an experienced social innovation consultant, leveraging over 10 years of work in the nonprofit and business sector in executive positions. She trained as an engineer. She's driven to solve challenging problems and take pride in working towards a realistic and meaningful solutions to tough organizational and systemic challenges. One such systemic challenge that she's working on is with the Energy Futures Lab in designing and delivering the work in the Energy AI initiative stream. So this work seeks to understand the pinch points in the system and generate innovative solutions at the cross section of digital innovation and energy transition in Alberta. She was resident of the Banff Center Social Innovation Residency in 2015 and recognized by the Women's Executive Network as a future leader of the top 100 most powerful women in Canada in 2008. So join me in welcoming Lindsay, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, David. Really appreciate the intro. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's session. First, going to start off by introducing our first speaker, and that is Gregory Robert. Gregory Robert has held several senior leadership positions throughout his career over the past 20 years. Greg's previous position was at Siemens Global, lead for its managed transition offering that supports utilities during their transition toward a cleaner, digitalized operational model. He has championed this type of transformation work in Canada, the United States, and in the Middle East. Prior to Siemens, Greg led the Delivery Management Risk Management Group within the System Integrator Division in Bell Canada that covered healthcare, corrections, government, and communication sectors. Greg was also director for an engineering consulting firm responsible for environmental, agricultural, mechanical, and electrical disciplines. He was responsible for establishing the buildings division within this company. Greg started his career responsible for the regional engineers and union personnel for Honeywell Limited, delivering energy audits and automation solutions and services in the commercial and institutional sectors. Greg has held positions in professional organizations, including the Association of Professional New Brunswick, and is past president of the Consulting Engineers of New Brunswick. Please welcome Gregory. In addition to Gregory, we're joined by Jen Hiscock. So Jen Hiscock leads the Smart Grid and Renewable Energy portfolio for Enercan's Office of Energy R&D. Her prior work with the CanMet Energy Research Labs on smart grid development and the integration of renewable and distributed energy resources has given her a comprehensive understanding of smart grid technology development in Canada. She represented Canada as a national expert in the IEA, the International Smart Grid Action Network, ISGAN, it's one of those acronyms, and facilitated knowledge exchange and collaboration on smart grid projects in Canada as manager of the Canada Smart Grid Action Network. With engineering and business degrees, Jen studies the dynamics of innovation surrounding the technology and policy development of smart grid and distributed energy resources. She collaborates with her provincial counterparts across the country and utility and industry partners to advance smart grid and distributed energy projects. Please welcome Jen. And lastly, we are joined by Vanessa White. Vanessa White is the Director of Renewable and Alternative Energy in the Clean Resources Division at Alberta Innovates. Prior to joining Alberta Innovates, Vanessa spent more than 20 years in the upstream petroleum industry, where she drove innovation and developed her diverse background in project management, technology development, and pilot operation. Vanessa is passionate about energy literacy. In 2016, she founded a company informing elementary and junior high students about the value of diversity in the Canadian energy portfolio. Vanessa sits on the board of directors of the Society of Petroleum Engineers Canadian Educational Foundation and is the founding chair of the organization's Energy Literacy Committee. Vanessa's other board positions include the Decentralized Energy Canada's Board of Directors and Foresight Clean Tech Accelerators Alberta Advisory Board. Please welcome Vanessa White to the room as well. Thanks everybody for joining. Excited to get the conversation started. So first question for this evening is, I just would love to hear from your vantage point how you personally feel about where things are at with regards to the transition towards net zero. So I don't know who wants to start.
I can go ahead, Lindsay. So from my perspective, looking at things nationally, I would say it's both intimidating, but also really motivating. Technically, I would say it's not trivial, but the good thing is that technically we have a pretty good idea what direction that we're going to need to go in to be able to reduce our emissions in Canada down to net zero by 2050. And I'm looking at it more particularly from the perspective of the electricity sector. And we have a sense technically what that pathway is going to look like. What is challenging about it is all of the aspects around the technology. So by that, I mean the regulations that are governing the role of different players in the electricity sector and how markets are managed, energy markets themselves, investment patterns in electricity infrastructure. And then when you look at who's going to be able to fund a lot of the development of this infrastructure, I see a requirement for a lot of coordination. And we don't necessarily have a great track record for coordination across multiple levels of government. And that's really going to have to be something that we're addressing when we look at a lot of the infrastructure projects that we're going to have to undertake in the next 30 years. The timeline is also daunting because 30 years is a long time, but also that's like, how long does your furnace last? 20 years? So you're going to replace it once in that amount of time. So we have one investment decision to influence there. How long do your vehicles last? Maybe 10, 15 years. So maybe we have two investment decisions to influence in that time. And when you're talking about electricity infrastructure, they last like 40 years or more. So we have like one investment decision to influence in that time. So by that sense, there's a lot of pressure to be able to get the right information out there, the right standards in place, enabling people to make good decisions, and all the other enabling pieces in place to influence those one or two investment decisions they're going to make in that amount of time. But the good news is we have an idea of where we're going to go and what we're going to use.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. Vanessa, I see your hand is raised, so maybe we'll go to you next.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think Jen had some fantastic points there. And I think the thing for me is the excitement that you're starting to see, especially from non-traditional industries like the one I spent many years of my career with in terms of oil and gas, that these are, industries that are historically perceived as in opposition to the movement towards renewables and net zero. And you're seeing some huge commitments starting to come out of those industries. And so I think there's a huge opportunity that we're starting to see as industries that perhaps have been previously perceived as in competition or against that movement, really starting to figure out how they can contribute and how they can work in that transition to move us towards that position of net zero. Very exciting times.
It is super exciting. Thanks for sharing, Vanessa.
Yeah, and maybe I'll try to round that off a little. So I see our challenge as short-term, mid-term, long-term, and I think as Jen has identified, there are a number of things that we can do right now, and identifying what those are and investing in those and getting the right decisions early is really important, or we're not going to make our short-term goals. And then you go to the other end, which are some of the longer term plays where, we're trying to get at the 80-20 rule. The last 20 is the hard part. That is the getting closer to the 2050 timeframe. And those longer term plays require investment, and balancing that investment between the short term, do it now, and the longer term plays that we still need will be a challenge. What really encourages me is if you looked back a year, 2 years, 5 years, none of us were having this conversation. So energy transition wasn't even possible because we need an army of people who are willing to make different decisions than we did previously. And I think I'm encouraged because we have that now. We didn't have that even a year ago, I don't think.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely changing the conversation for sure. I've noticed it in the work that we've been doing as well. Just general interest is different than it was even, like you mentioned, a year ago. One of the things we hear often, and I'm curious what you think, is just as more renewables come onto the grid and as people are making choices for electric vehicles, there's lots of folks that are nervous about electricity reliability. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are around, is this fear warranted? Do we have the grid capacity and or the design to accommodate this increased electrification of cooking, heating, and transportation? And I see, Greg, you've raised your hand, so maybe we'll go to you first. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump into this one. So I live in New Brunswick. We're a national organization. I just happen to live in New Brunswick, and New Brunswick is one of those provinces that have, over the previous decades, spent a lot of time electrifying already. So some stats just for info's sake, we're between 50 and 60% fully electrically heated in our province. Electric cooking would be normal. Electric hot water is typical. And so we've spent a decent amount of time getting our grid built, getting the building infrastructure built, getting that stuff in place to get us where we are kind of today. And I think I say that just sharing the fact that it is possible, and our climate isn't that different than Alberta, maybe northern Alberta, but it's not that different than southern Alberta. So electrically heating homes, electrically cooking, electric hot water is possible. And I've never owned a house that wasn't fully electrically heated. So I think I just want to share with people that the engineering is out there. It's proven, it works. I will tell you, the rest of the world is arm wrestling with this same question. So it's not trivial, but with the right decisions and the right design, it is possible.
I might add that from a reliability perspective, we're a ways away from those immediate concerns in most provinces. When you look to the East Coast, actually, when you look at PEI in Nova Scotia, they've got actually really high penetrations of wind power feeding into the grid. But most of the rest of the grids in Canada, on average, you're looking outside of hydro, of course, in our hydro provinces, but on average from variable renewables, you're looking at 10%. So it's not much, and so it's not an immediate concern. But sure, once you're getting up to 40%, you start taking seriously how you're going to maintain power quality and reliability. And we've actually funded some research in recent years in this space, and we're continuing to fund some work through a consortium that's called Utility Forum. And so that's a group of system operators, and a system operator is someone who is in charge of balancing supply and demand on the grid. So in Alberta, this is your Alberta electricity system operator, your AESO, AESO. And so in other provinces, it would just be the vertically integrated utility like SaskPower. In any case, they're all working together to try to figure out, all right, what kind of requirements do we have from a controls perspective to be able to better manage the grid once we start seeing more and more power come in from variable renewable energy sources like wind and solar. And so you're starting to see a lot of trends, a lot of activity around storage being partnered with those. But at the same time, there's a lot of controls capabilities that come in with the power electronics that you use to connect the wind and the solar generation to the grid that can actually solve a lot of those problems that we're observing when you just straight inject the power from those two sources of electricity. So that is to say, you don't necessarily need a battery coupled with the solar, because the inverter, that's the name of the technology that you're, I'm sorry for all the folks who install this stuff and you sleep and breathe this, but just to try to be accessible. The inverter is the control unit that they use to inject the power onto the grid. And those control units are way smarter today than they were, back in the Ontario microfit days. We're able to use those units now to be able to control the type of power that's being injected onto the grid so that it smooths out peaks or spikes in frequency, and we can use those units to help improve the overall power quality. So it's exciting to see that, if you just control these devices in a different way, they're actually solving problems. They're not just, causing problems by using, kind of the dumb inverters that we were using in the old days to inject the power. So there's a lot of room for growth there, and there's a lot of activity in that space in Canada.
Thanks, Jen. I'd like to just kind of build on where you were going with that, and that there are definitely solutions. And you've talked about one of the great solutions that we're starting to see around the increased digital control that we're seeing in terms of some of the technology. But I'd like to go back and revisit the battery storage piece, or the storage piece that you mentioned. And so, I think storage is definitely one solution that really has a potential to be a significant impact, and it can occur anywhere in the system. And so on the generation side of things, we're looking at long duration storage that can provide electricity when the solar or other renewable isn't producing, to help manage that intermittency issue. Renewable generation would obviously have to be designed so that it produces enough electricity, not only to provide what is needed to the grid, but also to recharge that energy storage during the time. At the consumer end, energy storage can actually be the battery in your electric vehicle. And so you have the opportunity to basically have a battery backup as you've got your electric vehicle plugged into your home if there is an upset in terms of the grid. Another method that we have in terms of helping manage grid reliability is changes to our consumer habits. Using the EV as the example, maybe we can use timers to charge them during off-peak hours, and again, try to take some of the highs and lows out of the peak demand cycle in the province.
Awesome, thank you. I'm curious to know, you mentioned some of them, but are there any other kind of innovative technologies or approaches that are being used to ensure grid reliability? And I think maybe if you can speak more to kind of the increased demand just based on the electrification. I know you mentioned a little bit about that, Greg, but I know there are some concerns and conversations around, well, what happens, if we see a huge spike in electric vehicles, which, has a huge demand at a particular time of day when everybody comes home from work, is charging their car when they arrive home from work. So I'm just curious if you can comment on some of those strategies.
So maybe, Lindsay, I'll jump in first on this one. As Alberta Innovates, we fund technology projects. And so there's quite a few interesting ones that are in my area of expertise, or the area that I look after. And so a lot of it, again, is focused in that energy storage space. And it's not just about batteries, but around new and innovative technologies that are being developed to support that grid reliability in the future. And so I'm just going to take a moment to talk about a few of them here. And hopefully the the partners that we work with are happy that I'm sharing some information about their technologies here. But one of them is pumped hydro storage, and it's not really a new technology, but it is somewhat new to Alberta. And so Canyon Creek, which is a project that's operated by TC Energy, ultimately is basically using 2 reservoirs. And so when demand is low, they're pumping water from the lower reservoir to the higher one. So using the electricity that is available in that low demand period to move the fluid so that it's in a position that when demand is high, they can generate electricity similar to a hydroelectric dam where the water is flowing from that upper reservoir down to the lower one. There's also some variations on pumped hydro storage. One is being evaluated by the team at QuidNet Energy. And so what they're doing is they're using subsurface rock layers and converting them into energy storage reservoirs. And so that's allowing large scale renewable integration and grid management from that perspective. We're starting to see some variations of compressed air storage, where it's actually air that's being held under pressure and then released through a turbine to produce electricity. And so there's quite a bit of interest in that space as well. Another area that is really starting to gain some traction in the province is small modular nuclear reactors as an option to replace baseload with a non-emitting energy source in the future. And so as Jen introduced the ISO, there's definitely some more information in the ISO's 2021 technology forward report that was released last year. And so they've identified in there quite a few new technologies that are on Alberta's radar. And so if the audience is interested, there's definitely some information there for you to follow up on after the presentation.
Thanks, Vanessa.
I can compliment a bit. It's great to hear about solar storage. Those are like peas in a pod. And if you're in the solar business, I encourage you to wrap your head around the storage business as well, because increasingly I expect we're going to see a lot more synergies on the business end of things, not just with the technology things, because an inverter is an inverter. On the demand side, though, Lindsay, which you brought up earlier, there's some really exciting capabilities that we're seeing from the demand, like the loads that are able to balance supply. So traditionally, when we first built these electricity systems, we always thought about using supply to meet demand. But now, through the smart grid controls that we have of these technologies, we can use demand to match supply. So it works well for certain devices like your smart hot water heaters that Greg was talking about. And check out Canada's East Coast, because these guys have been playing in the space of smart demand or intelligent load management. It depends on the phrase you're looking for, but these guys have been in this space for a while and they punch way above their little economic weight. So it's amazing to see what they're doing in that space, and it's transferable across Canada. But you can use your smart hot water heaters. They've got space heaters now that can store the heat in these ceramic bricks so that you can preheat the bricks, but you're not, heating up your house at 2 a.m, because the heater then disperses the heat when you need it at 6:30 when everybody's waking up in the morning. So we have these ways that we can now store energy in different forms in the devices that we're using in our home to smooth out those peaks that Vanessa was talking about. And all of that is adding to our ability to look at demand balancing from both sides of the equation. And some of these things aren't just technical, although the communications and the controls is a big part of it, but some of it is pricing too. So when Vanessa is suggesting, why don't we do off-peak charging for our electric vehicles, some of that are the price incentives. And are they out there, or are you only getting flat rate charge for your power at all times of day? So playing around with dynamic pricing and different pricing schemes for different customers based on their needs and their profiles is something that I expect we're going to see growth in different parts of Canada.
Yeah, maybe. Thanks for the shout out there, Jen. But I'll just add a couple more of the storage concepts. So there's, I don't know if you guys are aware, but these, I'll call them smart energy products for a minute on the demand side. So in the hot water tank game, that's been kind of normal in Canada and North America, I would say. I've recently come across an organization in Finland who would be, or Norway, sorry, who would be the leader in, I would say, demand side smart energy topics. And they have a high temperature stainless steel hot water that will do about 400% as effective in storage as the hot water tanks we typically see in North America. So they've been at this longer than we have, even in Canada. And so there are some really innovative ideas. Molten salt is another one that that we're looking at out east. And just using the smart thermostat in your home and using the thermal mass of your home the same way you would the thermal mass in a hot water tank for doing demand control. It's all possible. Obviously, you need the software behind it and the system operators who are using it and able to dispatch it when they want. And but the technology is moving, and every week it seems like there's a new player in the storage game. So.
Thanks for nerding out on the technologies. It's exciting to see and hear about everything that's happening. It's definitely, I think, you know, I'm relatively new to this space. I feel like it's always like drinking a fire hose. So I'm sure some of the audience members feel the same. But it does seem super exciting and promising. Having said that, I know there are some challenges and bumps along the way. So I'm just curious if you can share some thoughts on, you know, what are some of the challenges you would see kind of in reaching the, you know, net zero by 2050 target, and then what's holding us back?
I'll try one, and well, maybe it's more than one, but so if you think of the way we pay for our electricity today, so we all have a bill that's based on, you know, kilowatt hours is at the top of the list, and that's based on kind of an average use over the month. But I think where the industry is moving towards is different markets and different regulatory rules where the time we use electricity is much more important than how much we use average over a month. And there are movements kind of across the country, although it's a slow movement towards those pricing signals. This has been going on in other jurisdictions, California and Europe, for a while now. And we're just starting to get caught up to that game, I would say. That would be one piece. And I do think making sure that we have a regulatory system that motivates anybody who wants to invest in clean tech on the grid, I think is important. And that is not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's an open space right now. There are limits and constraints. And I think getting the regulatory system balanced so that people have the ability to invest when they want, but they're not doing stuff on the grid that's going to harm it. So getting those rules right, I think, is probably one of the biggest challenges we have in front of us.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can maybe jump in and add a bit more of a perspective, again, building on the expertise from many years in the oil and gas industry. You know, Alberta is very energy rich. And so that means that many of the other sources of energy that we have in the province are really quite inexpensive. And so the cost to move to non-emitting generation is struggling to meet the economics of the current generation technologies that we have, just given the low input costs that we have associated with it. Now, the opportunity that exists is as carbon pricing increases, it creates that opportunity where those non-emitting technologies can compete with the current incumbent technologies. And so, you know, it's around that cost curve, the benefit curve, the how do we, you know, do what we want to do in terms of moving towards that net zero, but still understanding that there is economics at play in terms of the ownership of these facilities that have, you know, long designed operating lives that are really hard to overcome. So there's still a lot of opportunity, but I think some of the challenges are really around the economics of how can the non-emitting technologies compete with the current market environment that we have here in the province.
Yeah, I might, I guess I might try to nuance some of what's been said from a customer perspective. So as I was mentioning at the outset, there's 2-3 investment decisions that we get to influence before 2050. And those aren't, as of right now, those aren't easy decisions for a customer to navigate in a lot of cases. So even if you look at just basic home efficiency and insulation, that is still a bit of the Wild West when it comes to like getting a quote and getting recommendations on the best way to be able to seal up your building envelope, maintain ventilation and like air quality and health in your house, and at the same time improve your energy efficiency. Because all you get when you ask for a quote is somebody saying, this is what I do and this is how much it'll cost you. They're not helping you figure out what does my home really need. And we know that, you know, as we make this transition, your first dollar should still always be on efficiency before you start slapping on equipment. But if that part that we've been in this game for a long time now is still difficult to navigate, when it comes to being able to charge your vehicle at home, put solar on the roof, consider storage and where you're going to place it around the building. And am I going to move to air source heat pumps and mini splits, or do I want to do this with central air? These are some complicated investment decisions for customers, and it's not necessarily clear yet who's going to come in and help them navigate all of that. And this is very much kind of a disputed battleground for utilities, because they're also wondering, you know, what is our role in assisting customers? They have to do these interconnect assessments. So anytime you want to plug something into the grid, they have to do an interconnect assessment and figure out what kind of impact that's going to have on the system locally. And that can take a lot of time. When they're doing an assessment of how much solar they can allow to plug into a neighborhood, or how many electric vehicles are going to be able to plug in before it's going to overload that transformer in your neighborhood, all of this stuff is not necessarily standardized across the country yet. And so sometimes it can be really expensive for customers, or sometimes it can take a really long time. And so these are things where we're trying to smooth out those responsibilities, and those regulatory barriers that Greg was referencing are really at that space, because right now these utilities are not allowed to go behind the meter. They're not allowed to help customers figure out those sorts of investment decisions. But in some cases, utilities are saying, you know, the case of Hydro One in Ontario, they serve the rural parts of Ontario. They had a bunch of customers with some voltage problems, and they said, look, we can spend this many thousands of dollars on upgrading the lines, or I can put a battery in the homes of all of these customers and it's going to be cheaper, and that will provide them backup power and improve power quality for them. And they were finally able to secure permission from their regulator to be able to offer that, because they were able to justify that they were able to save on the customer costs through rates for cost recovery. And it wasn't a service that the private sector would want to provide, because there's always this question about market fairness. So this is going to be a really interesting space for those of you online who are in this business to start to navigate and to figure out how you can work with utilities to figure out how to best serve these customers and how to navigate these complicated questions.
Jen, I love how you're bringing the customer into the perspective. And one of the things that the Alberta Smart Grid Consortium, which is made up of distribution facility owners here in Alberta, and Alberta Innovates, who chairs it, is that we recently completed a customer engagement study. And so the study looked at how we communicate with the customers in the province in a completely different way than the traditional mechanisms of, do you have the service you're looking for, and do you like the price, which is kind of the historical way of how you know, the distribution facility owners get information back from their customer base. And so what this study did is it provided new insights into the customer awareness around grid modernization. It provided an opportunity to begin a new series of engagement opportunities with customers and work with them in non-traditional ways. And so we've just released the final report. It's available on the Alberta Innovates Project Library. I can post that in the chat later if people want to go take a look at it. And right now, what the consortium is looking at doing is mapping out the next steps in terms of how we're going to build on the learnings that came out of that study. And so what we're seeing is even from a utility perspective, we're trying to find new ways of communicating and learning from what our customers want so that we can be more customer driven in terms of how we modify the grid, how we work with the regulators, and how we move forward into that new modern grid that we're all looking for.
Amazing, thank you. I think I'll move to, I think we're at around 7:45, so I'm going to move to some of the questions from the audience. The first question coming live is, do you think the way to accomplish net zero should be towards electrifying everything? Why or why not? So I'm not sure if someone feels comfortable taking a stab at that one.
I can take a start at it. So yeah, we asked ourselves this question, and we actually ran a simulation, a model to try to look at all of the potential energy loads in Canada that we could electrify. And so some things you just can't electrify because you need molecules to react and create gases so that you can make something like steel. So there are some things that just doesn't make sense to electrify. And so in that case, you're looking at clean fuel solutions. But for the things that could technically make sense to electrify, we then tried to look at, okay, what is economically feasible right now, and then what are the spaces that we need innovation to help us make that jump. And so when we were looking at this, we found that that we could electrify about 60% of the loads that were out there. 51% for a 60% increase in the power capacity that we have right now. So that was looking at all sorts of things like your lawnmower becoming electric, and in addition to vehicles becoming electric and heating becoming electric. So there are certain things that make sense, but there's definitely there are industrial processes that don't make sense to electrify. And then there's some gray zone in there where it'll be interesting to see where the economics go on some of the hydrogen fuels or ammonia or other kind of clean fuels production options that we're starting to see get developed in this space. And in addition, of course, to looking at carbon capture and storage, for when we're going to use emitting solutions to be able to generate energy required for some sort of process. But we want to, like, those will be valuable things for the dedicated processes that we want to use. And so it doesn't make sense to use kind of that molecule value for things that we could easily electrify. So I think we're going to have to, navigate what makes sense for electrification, and then those are the things that we're going to pursue, and there's a lot of room for us to pursue those pretty aggressively, but yeah, I don't think anybody's debating that we can't electrify 100% of all energy needs.
Yeah,
I think.
Oh, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, so I think when I was talking earlier about the low-hanging fruit or the stuff we can do quickly, I think there are those things that can be electrified where the technology exists. Grid upgrades may be needed, building upgrades may be needed, but technically there's nothing stopping us other than supply chain, we'll say it, and funds. I think those are the ones that are going to be the opportunities for us to hit our net zero near-term targets. Some things, as Jen said, are on the other end of the spectrum and we will never be able to. And then it's that middle space where we got to make sure we have the right investments at the right time, so that we're decarbonizing appropriately and not just spending money because there isn't an unlimited pot there. So we have to be wise about those decisions in that gray zone.
Yeah, I'll just follow up, Greg, just something you talked about. There's actually a question coming in from Cameron. He says, when you talk about electrifying more and more aspects of our energy usage, there is a massive amount of precious metals that will be needed for infrastructure like batteries, for example. So what role does the supply chain procurement play in our efforts to reach net zero goals? And I think you kind of touched on that, saying that's like one of the kind of like things getting in the way a little bit right now is that the supply chain's not like matching kind of the demand for these types of things. So maybe you could just elaborate on that question a little bit further.
Yeah, I actually would like to propose that we don't truly know the supply chain weak links fully yet, because I think like everybody around the globe is headed towards these same topics. This isn't just us, right? And I think it is going to be a challenge. And there's positive and negatives to every decision, right? The supply chain for our existing infrastructure has limits and investments and pros and cons. Precious metals will always be an issue. Is there an endless supply? No, there isn't. So I don't have the answer, but a supply chain is important for us to understand all of the components that go into what it is where we're headed to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's some interesting technologies that are being looked at right now here in the province around that space of extracting lithium and vanadium from waste streams that come out of other industries and so we're looking to try to find not only the raw materials in the more classic environment of mining, but also around where can we find these sources of those materials elsewhere. And within the province, there's a critical mineral strategy that's underway and being developed. And so I think we're going to start seeing more information around that pathway in terms of trying to really understand what the opportunity is and what some of the barriers or challenges might be in that space as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for growth in the recycling space. And I think it's there's going to be a debate. So we're working on the national critical minerals strategy as well, and it's a joint dialogue with the US. And there's some debate around like creating hubs for battery recycling and where those hubs should be, and if it makes sense to host them in Canada. I think after some of the experience that we saw with our waste disposal and recycling trade with Asia, it's going to make sense to have some of that capacity probably in Canada as well. Although we're going to want to leverage these north-south markets and to reach economies of scale. But that's a big area for growth. And e-waste is the circular economy, I think, is going to catch up in terms of level of importance and attention that it's getting as we start to elaborate these plans towards our transition to net zero, and we start to get a sense of what kind of technologies are going to be implicated. So I expect to see that as a big area for growth as well.
Awesome, thank you. I just want to circle back earlier in kind of some of your stories, you were talking about pricing. And so David actually has a question about, he says ensuring proper pricing is critical for the uptake of renewable technologies, and was just wondering your thoughts on whether or not you see AESO or the AUC reversing their decision in the future to give back distributed generation credits. And maybe in answering this question, you could just kind of comment around distributed energy generation versus kind of like centralized distribution.
Unfortunately, I can take a first stab at it, but unfortunately, I'm not in a position that I can say that I have any insight in terms of whether or not we're going to see a change in terms of how credits are going to be managed in terms of distributed energy. But there definitely is advantages in terms of having distributed energy resources where your generation supply is co-located with your demand. You've got less losses, meaning that more of the electricity is actually being used to meet the demand, and that ultimately means that your overall system efficiency is higher. So obviously this is something I think when we look at strengthening the overall Alberta grid, it's a huge opportunity, and it's definitely something that we're going to see transition and move forward. But regarding the economics of it, I'm not in a position that I have any information to be able to comment.
Yeah, so I'll try one slant on it. So we in Canada have benefited from central generation all of our lives, and the United Nations does a study every few years on countries and their overall health, literally from the use of electricity. And Canada, along with the Norwegian countries and the United States and those kind of countries, are all in the top quadrant. And we're in the top quadrant as a healthy country because we have had a large availability of electricity from fossil fuel or from hydro-based or whatever that case may be. But it's been central primarily across the country. And then you go to other countries who are just getting into the electricity game, the Electrify Africa initiative. There is no transmission grid. There is no central generation plant. Everything is distributed because that's what works for them, and that's the infrastructure that they have, and they're easy as path. So the question is, in the future in Canada, what's the balance between those two extremes? I personally believe there are more opportunity for distributed when the economics make sense. But I also believe that our utilities have a huge role in some of the reliability and the inertia and some of the other, let's call it the electrical engineering characteristics that large central plants provide that small distributed don't. So I don't think it's a one or the other. I think there is a balance depending on what the system needs.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to pave our way to net zero by 2050 with rooftop solar, but it's going to be a much greater or a more defining characteristic of the grid going forward. It is just how much we're using that distributed generation and distributed power control, and it's a trend we're seeing in major grids, even in Quebec. So the cheapest power in Canada, you're with the project that they just completed in Lac-Mégantic. So they had that tragic fire. The downtown core was decimated, and so as they were rebuilding, they were looking at ways that they could rejuvenate that core, but also be able to put in longer term opportunities for greater energy efficiency and balance and reduce emissions from other uses. And so they've put in solar and storage, and they're using that locally generated power to make sure that they can meet projected peaks in the future from commercial loads as well as residential loads. So this is even in Quebec, right? And right now, during some of these cold snaps, they're using a lot of their dual fuel capabilities to switch back over to natural gas to meet their peaks. So if we increase the amount of distributed generation that's available from solar, then there's not going to be a need for that sort of reliance, especially if it's coupled with storage. So even in the hydro provinces, they're starting to look really seriously at the value of distributed generation and distributed control strategies to complement these kind of two hubs that they can use to balance the overall provincial demand.
I think there's a question that's kind of related to what you're just saying here about natural gas specifically. Alberta is known for its natural gas because it is so cheap as a source. So how much work does the Alberta grid need to support significant electrification across the province in electric vehicles and water heaters and other appliances that are typically natural gas here in Alberta? Does it make sense to electrify the appliances that are currently using natural gas, for example? So you can comment on that.
Yeah, so Lindsay, again, that comes back to the statement that I made earlier that, really the driver is the economics of it. And so we really need to get to a point where we're making the decisions around not only the economics, but around the the impact of being able to move towards a low emitting or a net zero environment for our grid. And you know, carbon taxing is definitely an opportunity in terms of helping to level that playing field in terms of the cost of the existing incumbent technologies that exist. But you know, there's other opportunities, and definitely opportunities out there for alternative non-emitting resources or generation. Small modular nuclear reactors, while not yet commercial, are a really promising technology that can help move us towards the ability to have greater electrification, but have it at an opportunity where we're still seeing large centralized bulk generation at the same time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. You know, I haven't looked specifically at the economics in Alberta, but I can imagine if you stand up an air source heat pump to the existing natural gas, it's not going to make sense for you to economically just make the switch right now. So I think there's going to be need for other incentives to be able to help make that pencil out for customers. But there's also some opportunity for district heating options and district heating utilities. And so this is a space, you know, Vanessa was commenting earlier how who we might have characterized as opponents to the electrification pathway or the electrification trend are starting to realize, actually, I have a lot of assets and a lot of controls knowledge to bring to bear around this sort of problem, and I think some of you know, our gas companies are starting to think of themselves as energy service companies, and they're starting to try to understand, okay, how could I start to transition towards different sorts of offerings for customers in this space. So I'm hopeful that that this is going to you know, once we start bringing those minds to bear with who've really been thinking about this, the economics and the infrastructure in investment cycles for a long time, you know, once we're able to help them see their role in this transition, I think we're going to start to see some real competitive alternatives open up.
Yeah, Jen, and thank you for bringing that up. We're seeing some significant interest in terms of our traditional oil and gas industry looking at options. Geothermal is definitely something that is a very easy step out type opportunity for many of our oil and gas players. We've actually got a project going on with Futura, who is a subsidiary of Razor Energy, and so Razor operates the Swan Hills operations, oil and gas operations in central Alberta. And what they're doing there is they've now got a geothermal facility being installed and being set up in that area, making use of the excess heat that's coming up along with the water from the oil operations, and that's allowing them to put in a combined binary geothermal plant plus a natural gas turbine to create a new electricity generation center that's happening in that area. And so it's that blend of those oil and gas companies that are starting to see that they can be part of the solution towards net zero and moving in that way and trying to find ways where they can work towards that solution, as opposed to, you know, being that opposition to that change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a buzzword in the industry called non-wires alternatives.
Yes.
And I think I'd like to change that perspective to, let's not always think of our solutions as the way we did 10, 20 years ago, because there are so many other alternatives that we didn't go down the path because there was an easier, you know, that's just the way it's done kind of comment. And I think what this whole energy transition has got us to is we actually got to rethink all of our decisions as we go through this community energy planning, geothermal. The list goes on about alternatives that are available. cost effective still needs to be figured out, but there are alternatives to what we've been doing for the past decades.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny you should mention non-oil alternatives, because I was actually just going to bring up a question related to that, and specifically around electric vehicles. So there's a comment about electric vehicles becoming backup batteries. I know there's some kind of dialogue on the United States about that. Some smart charging in particular times. And then there's the question around if the issue is not just the time we use them, but also the rate. Could we not just have everyone charge their electric vehicles at, say, 2 kilowatt instead of 9 and get 4 times more out of the grid? So anyways, just if you can comment on some of the space around electric vehicles, and non-oil alternatives, and other examples of kind of, just go there if you can. Thanks. Trying to summarize like 3 comments in one question. Doing a terrible job.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. This is an exciting space, and we're starting to ask all the time, even if they're proposing infrastructure, and we're even seeing this at the transmission level, but I'll come back to the house. But even at the transmission level, we can get a lot more out of our high voltage lines using controls technologies that we haven't been implementing and we haven't been leveraging. So, I hope we're going to see that on any kind of proposed infrastructure, and also getting more out of the wires that we already have. Just by reducing the amount of losses that they see, because we're not calibrating them as much. We're still using like seasonal set points based on average summer conditions and average winter conditions. And like we're all observing now that the weather is becoming anything but average. So yeah, I think this is a big space. When you get back down to the home, there's also an intersection point that I think is going to become pretty critical for customers, and that's your electrical panel. So a lot of times, as soon as you want to put in an electric vehicle charger, you're going to have to upgrade the panel to your home. And so when you're doing that, there's an opportunity to also install smart electrical panels. And so there's a bit of a question of where you want the point of control, whether you want it on your vehicle, on the charger, on the panel itself, or how these things are all going to be talking to each other and integrating. I think those smart charge capabilities are going to be something that it's going to be the way that people are charging their vehicles in the future. The question is going to be, how can we optimize those charging patterns so that you don't get too much wear on your battery on your vehicle and you take the hit as the car owner. And so, that might include putting a battery between your draw and the vehicle draw, so that you can optimize your vehicle life at the same time optimize your demand patterns, so you're not getting hit with the demand charges, and you're staying within the limits of your electrical panel. So there's a little bit of these connecting the dots and then coming up with a solution that's reliable in that space, and this is an area where we're going to need some standardization to make sure that this is reliable and seamless. And it's not like me trying to connect my work laptop to my home printer, which is a nightmare. And so you can imagine that customers won't put up with that if it's the same thing for charging their vehicle.
Yeah, and those are some great points. And one of the things that came to my mind as Jen was talking about all of the various different ways that we can look at optimizing the system to be able to manage the growth and the changes that we want to see in terms of consumer response and consumer attitudes. And one thing that came to mind is that the city of Lethbridge has actually been working on a voltage reduction project for the last few years, and so what they're doing there, they're working on that one is trying to really see how far they can kind of get their voltage to a little bit lower levels, still be able to provide the same level of service to their customer base, but ultimately that little bit lower voltage really helps manage the demand across the grid and reduce the overall supply that's needed. And so, we're starting to see things that in the past might have we might have perceived as being a very small incremental shift, but when you actually apply it over a large consumer base, it actually has the potential to be quite significant in terms of the kind of opportunities that it can create in terms of helping us manage the overall supply to meet the demands that we're looking for.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thought here. So we've talked about heat pumps, electric heat, hot water tank. We talked about battery for car. We talked about in-home battery. If you start to add that all up, your house, your commercial building is starting to become a really, really important asset for the grid. And so I back to the standards conversation. I don't think we're there yet in understanding the concept of home control and what that looks like. And do we treat the home itself as one asset that helps us make the grid more resilient? At the same time, consumers can get reimbursed for offering up their home as an asset. So then we're back to the consumer engagement, making sure consumers are up for that. Pricing signals are important. So the technology all exists for what we're talking about, but making it in a manner that consumers will sign up for it. And the grid benefits, consumers benefit, we all win in the end, I think is the silver bullet. If we could figure that out, we'd all, it would be a really short conference today, but we got a ways to go yet.
Yeah, we're almost done with the moderated question time. Just have a few minutes left before we go into the other Zoom channel. And so sorry for folks who I didn't get to your question. I encourage you to come to the next 15 minutes. If you want to ask your specific question, you can ask it directly. I just wanted to give some space for those who aren't going to move over to the Zoom to hear some closing thoughts from you all around kind of like any closing messages or thoughts or takeaways. Something for me that's really been standing out is I think there's a shift from seeing like a one size fits all type mentality when it comes to this space, which is sort of, you know, we want the clear way it works for everyone. And I think the main shift that needs to happen is there isn't one clear way forward. It's a bunch of different things in a bunch of different places with best fit for purpose in the right time and place. So that's been a big learning for me. And anyways, I'll just ask for you guys to share some closing thoughts before we move on to the next Zoom.
Yeah, Lindsay, absolutely. You nailed it 100%. The options are endless. There are so much opportunity for us in terms of what we need to do next, how we can build this together. It will not be one solution that's going to solve all the problems. It's going to be a combination. It's going to be that what's the right mix or diversification of the opportunities that we have, whether that's on the generation side or whether that's on the actual end use component. And so we might find that there is heat driven opportunities that make a lot more sense than making everything entirely electricity driven. There's just so many different options here. And I think if I was to leave the viewers or the participants here with anything, it's optimism. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of people working on this. We're pulling, I think, all of us in the same direction right now, and it's a really exciting time to be part of this industry.
Great, go ahead. Or Jen.
Yeah, I'll so maybe just I would echo the fact this is an exciting time to be part of this industry, and I do think the flexibility and the options is important. I think if you look at pretty much every industry out there, consumers want a choice. And I think it's really neat that in this sector, probably for the first time, 10 years ago, we didn't have the choices that we have today. So I really think it's kind of neat, and people have the option to invest if they want in the grid. They but they don't have to if they don't want, and there are various number of options. The challenge I think we have is filtering our way through those options to understand what the best one is for the individual.
Yeah, I'm struggling. I have two ideas and I'm trying to pick, maybe I can weave them together. So I mentioned at the outset that, technically we're not too afraid. I mean, there's a lot that we have to do, especially on the standards front, but like Vanessa and Greg were both saying, we have lots of options. We don't have a lack of options. And even when you look in Canada, we don't have a lack of energy resources. This has always been, the paradox of choice for us. We're so rich in that respect. It's the coordination piece. And, amongst all of these options, how are we going to choose, and how are we going to determine these economic pathways for all these players? So somewhere I get a lot of hope from is looking at the leadership from municipalities. Because it turns out that those municipalities are often also the sole shareholders or contributor shareholders of a distribution company, a utility that's serving electricity in that area. And so they can actually direct a fair amount what they want to see for these types of transition pathways in their area. And it turns out if a city makes some bold statements and sets a bit of a direction, it makes it so much easier for the province and for the federal government to come in line and support that leadership. So where we really struggle to do this from a top-down perspective in this country, bottom up, if the leadership comes from the ground, from that municipal level, so much easier for us to all come in and support that direction and that transition. So if you can work with your city councilors and you can recognize the fact that they have a local distribution company to leverage as well, that they have an investor stake in a lot of cases, then you have a lot of influence to be able to direct locally what these pathways are going to look like. And it makes it so much easier for me and for others at other levels of government to come in and figure out how to help you realize that vision. So yeah, that's a bit of hope.
Yeah, there's actually a great case example. I think the town of Raymond is actually officially net zero as of like last year or something. So they're a great case example, to your point.
Yeah, there's
And
pretty
Heather,
cool
over to you
initiatives.
to transition.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I was just going to say, we have some programming this week. Tomorrow, we're with our wire providers. 4 of Alberta's are coming to chat. And we have programming this week all about some of the municipal financing options that are starting to roll out across Alberta. We're really excited about our new SEEP programs that many municipalities are adopting bylaws and financing for, hoping that the federal government will help finance a lot of those municipal programs, because they can get the bylaws in place, but they're having trouble getting the financing to give us the upfront for energy efficiency upgrades and solar. So anyways, this has been phenomenal. I feel like I'm closing, but I'm not. I'm actually here to say, let's keep chatting for 15 more minutes and in a more personal way, because I feel like this has been so rich and so wonderful. And I would love for some of our participants to be able to chat and ask you their questions personally. So Lorraine has kindly posted the Zoom link for the meeting in the chat. And I would ask everybody here to click on that link, and then we're all just going to go away from the webinar, leave the webinar, go to that meeting, and we'll reconvene there where we can have a little bit more relaxed dialogue and chat with our presenters more informally. So thank you all for this amazing presentation, and to AltaPro and David De Bruin for joining us today as sponsors. It's been a wonderful experience, but I'm not wrapping up yet. I'm going to wrap up when we get to the next meeting, because that's the really fun part. So thanks again, and please go ahead and click on the link in the chat now.